This story tells of a beautiful young girl who woke up one day and found herself in the body of a princess after dying from overwork. Besides this, she was reborn with a princess who had 4 merciless fathers. In fact, in her past life, the girl was really very young and died very unexpectedly, since she had been working on one project for a long time. But in the end, her body simply could not cope. Her name was Chan Jahi, and she was a real genius in her past life. She was a researcher who studied the theory of supersymmetric degeneration. But she was also a huge fan of fantasy novels, so she began her research to prove that fantasy worlds actually existed in reality. This is how her theory was born. It was that after death, people continue to be reborn in other dimensions, and she was able to actually take and prove her theory. When she woke up, she was reborn as a princess. Seeing herself in the mirror, she was very surprised because the girl definitely did not expect such a turn of events. But besides that, she was a princess who, according to the well, was supposed to die at the age of 12. And this, of course, shocked her greatly. For research, the girl read a lot of novellas, and she realized that she found herself in a story called The Princess's Diary. As she later found out, she completely matched the description of a princess named Artemis, also known as Princess Luna. She was incredibly happy that she was able to prove her theory. However, when she realized what this threatened her with, of course, she quickly became upset. The moment she was reborn into a new life, she found herself right on her 7th birthday. In the original story, it all started after the princess received one thing at a banquet on her birthday. The girl didn't even think about the fact that it could have been a dream. However, she was surprised by the very fact that she was reborn in the world of the novel that she had actually read. After Luna's hair was put in order, the maid was supposed to bring her a dress. However, when her other maid went to pick it up, she opened the door and discovered that it was her father. With this man was the imperial knight Pluto Lion Maple. When the girl saw him, she immediately recognized him and remembered the description of the story. He had dirty brown hair that contained all the darkness of the night sky, and his skin was white like her natural light ceramic. When she looked into his eyes, she remembered that in history he was the best killer, a devoted servant of the queen, and a demon on the battlefield. Because of this, Luna was of course very scared and even a little upset. He could mercilessly kill anyone. After all, he was the Dark Empire, so she was in mortal danger. He could also be the father of Princess Artemis, but this information was not reliably known, so the girl decided not to be scared in advance. Some time had passed since then, and she finally put on the right dress. She had a few hours before the birthday banquet. However, the moon had many questions that she wanted to know. For now, she put them aside because she only needed to think about how to escape before she was killed. According to the original story, and this might not be so easy, the girl also allowed her personal maids to wear the queen's dress, although that they refused this opportunity. Well, soon they simply fainted, losing consciousness. In fact, Luna was beautiful, she knew this, because as a precaution, these clothes could not be worn by people other than those with Comnelian blood. After she put the maids to bed, she immediately opened a small box in which a beautiful medallion was kept. These were 2 items for escaping invisibility, as in the original novel, so the girl was very happy. They were ordinary and did not have any abilities, but after the girl ties the ribbon on the brooch in a special way, it will glow brightly in the moonlight. Luna did it right away and saw that she really succeeded. This was a secret weapon that the princess often used when she simply ran away from the palace, even in the original story. She was glad that she remembered the story in every detail. She put on a maid's costume and looked just like a servant. After all, this medallion helped her change her appearance and even her height. When she ran out to the front door, she saw Pluto. He was holding a sword in his hands from which blood was flowing, and next to him lay a dying body. They argued among themselves, and eventually, Pluto got tired of listening to this man and finished him off with one move. Seeing this, the moon almost screamed. She managed to cover her mouth with her hand in time to prevent this from happening. In the original novel, she heard the news about the murder of a British spy, but did not see it with her own eyes. The girl was scared because she understood that if this man found out what she was trying to escape, he would kill her next. But the man heard that someone was there, so Luna simply had no choice. She appeared in front of him and introduced herself. According to the original novel, There was a time when a large number of new maids entered the palace who were recruited by Chancellor Eugene. Pluto could find out the truth. He initially began to think that she was suspicious, so the girl was worried. The man decided to take special precautions and asked her to open the suitcase. The girl did not know what to do because there was a lot of money in her suitcase that she took with her for food. With trembling hands, she had almost opened the suitcase. But then suddenly, the assistant of the knight commander ran up to him and told him that the chancellor was looking for him. The man went in that direction, and when his assistant saw the dead body, he was very scared. However, Pluto told him to deal with it. At the same time, he could not get the thoughts about this girl out of his head. He felt her presence even when he killed the spy. She was very suspicious to him, but now he had to follow orders and only then think about something else. Meanwhile, Luna continued her escape. However, she heard some melody coming from the half-open door, and she immediately looked inside. There, the girl saw a handsome blonde man, and of course she recognized him. The guy noticed this girl and called her closer to him. Luna went inside and now finally understood who this person was. His hair was like the light of the moon. It shone brightest in dim light, and he also had violet eyes that sparkled like the most beautiful amethysts. His cheeks were red and slightly resembled peaches, and his skin was light, as if it were porcelain. He looked like a real fairy, and his name was Endymion Bellium Hevelius. Also, this man was an important character in the original story, so the girl immediately introduced herself, and the man simply offered to dance for her because she was watching him so closely. Of course she would like to see this dance. However, I began to do this because it would be too dangerous for her, but the man unexpectedly quickly approached her and took the amulet from her. The moon immediately turned into a little girl, while the man began to carefully examine the amulet. The man tied a ribbon on her hand, while the moon was amazed that he recognized her, after which he properly greeted the girl. But at that moment, the doors to their dance hall opened, and Pluto walked in. He looked incredibly angry, and it was obvious. While the boys were arguing among themselves, Luna was very worried. She really hoped that no one would scold her, because she was, after all, a princess. She just ran away to save her life, so she hoped that he wouldn't start killing her for it. But when she saw that he took out his sword, she immediately thought that now the end would come for her. But opening her eyes, she saw that he had pointed it back at the man. Asked how dare such a dirty rat steal the back of something other than a princess? Well, the man reacted to this calmly. He was even ready to pay for it with his life. Luna understood that all this was serious, because Pluto was a person who could do this with ease. So in order to attract attention to herself, she burst into tears and hoped that this would somehow help. And indeed, he got distracted and therefore did not chop off the man's head right away. And by that time, another guy came to them. He was young, had purple hair, and one eye. When the moon looked at him, she immediately recognized him. It was a knight's escort princess. His name was Cupid Themis, and of course Pluto was very angry. After all, this man should have been next to the girl to protect her, but he was somewhere far away. Luna took advantage of this chance. She immediately ran to her knight and burst into tears. She began to blame Pluto for scaring her and all that sort of thing. They argued for a while, and the girl realized that Pluto was just there for a very long time because she was trying to escape, because it was serious after all. She was a princess, and he was only a commander. However, she did not understand why he allowed himself such rudeness. For some time they continued to argue among themselves, and eventually Cupid simply decided to take the girl away from all these disputes. After this, Pluto also left there because he didn't see any point there. However, Endymion smiled and began to mock him and asked if the man also thought that Princess Luna could be his daughter, since the guy himself considered her to be so. Even if he dressed like a prostitute, he was still one of Her Majesty's four, so there was no need to write him off. They started arguing among themselves because Pluto, of course, didn't like this. He was ready to take out his weapon again and threaten the man, but he didn't do it. The guy was incredibly angry, but only because he knew that this man was an imposter. After all, Amar's left eye was damaged, not his right. Meanwhile, the man was carrying the princess in his arms through the forest, and the girl began to worry a little because the road did not lead to her chambers, so she did not understand where he was carrying her. The man tried to calm her down, but he didn't succeed. She burst into tears, which made him a little wary. Luna took advantage of this moment and threw a distraction bomb right in his face. She immediately revealed this man with the help of magic. He was a completely different man. Luna then arbitrarily, looking down on this man, said that he needed to study the information better. After all, Cupid had a damaged eye on the other side. In fact, she was still grateful to him for this kidnapping, because she was able to escape using this idiot as bait. Smiling, the girl said that now that Princess Luna was kidnapped by a British spy, she could easily escape and no one would find out. The man immediately began to get angry at her and ask what exactly she meant. But Luna said that it was better for him to stay away because she still had the so-called flare, and there was another branch of the plot from the original story. The flash was a magical brooch that could change appearance and was a clever item used by the former Revolutionary Army. It was equipped with a special distraction function that could be used on an enemy if the brooch's owner was caught. This is exactly what Luna took advantage of. The man was incredibly confused. He didn't understand how she came to this conclusion and what he should do. He even called her a genius. Luna, meanwhile, realized that what bothered her even more was the fact that she was able to quickly adapt to the new world. In her previous life, she was a defenseless orphan and had one rule that said, "If you don't adapt quickly, you won't survive." And it was precisely this that influenced her life. The girl was already about to leave, but before she could take a step, she heard screams behind her. Turning her head to the side, she saw that it was Endymion. He was approaching straight towards her. The spy immediately grabbed the weapon and pulled the girl towards him. He began yelling at the man and threatening her. The guy immediately stopped because he didn't want the princess to be harmed. Luna began to worry a little because she did not foresee this moment and did not even understand at what moment he pulled out his knife. But then suddenly Andy, ignoring the words of this criminal, simply sat down on the grass and began to breathe calmly. The criminal didn't understand what he was doing at all, and most importantly, why. But the guy replied, "Compared to the princess, I'm just a person who has no value." And therefore, since he could protect her by kneeling or sacrificing his life, he was gladly ready to do so because her life was truly important. The moon was touched by this action. After all, this man was a second father to the princess. The girl continued to develop a plan on how to free herself from this terrible man. She remembered that there was also a strong shield in the ribbon. Luna wanted to use the bomb and the shield at the same time. The spy would then die, and she would also be caught. But for her, this would only be to her advantage. Everyone would begin to consider her dead. But at this distance, the bomb could damage Andy's mod, so she didn't know what to do. Of course, she didn't want to put this man in danger, but she tried to convince herself that the man was just a character from a novel. While she was trying to figure out what decision to make, the man who was a knight threw a dagger towards Andy and told him to use it to gouge out his own eyes. Of course, this amazed everyone, but the man replied that he had already been paid for this work, so he was satisfied. However, if the man showed him something interesting, then he could give them this princess. It was not important to him. Andy was truly devoted to the girl because she also considered himself her father. He grabbed the dagger and stuck it straight into his eye. When she saw this, Luna was amazed and immediately screamed loudly. But then suddenly some other gentle, but at the same time strong hands snatched her from the peony's hands. Looking up, she saw that it was Pluto, and was immediately very happy about this, because now she was saved. However, seeing her two potential fathers working together was something unusual for her. He explained the concept of his plan. Initially, the moon also understood that Pluto was a cluster of flowers that bloomed on the battlefield, a beautiful but bloody, fugitive, gifted demon. At that time, Andy came closer to them, and she saw that nothing had happened to him. He had only made the illusion of stabbing himself in the eye. While the spy was lying unconscious, Pluto saw a scratch on the girl's hand and realized that this was the man who had done it, so he was ready to cut off his hand for something like that. But the girl asked him not to do this. Of course the man ignored her. He was even ready to kill this man for even touching the moon. Since she didn't want to see more bloody casualties, the girl used heavy artillery. She hugged him around the neck and called him her dad. The man immediately melted upon hearing this, so he did not harm him in any way. Meanwhile, he turned to Andy and told him to drag this man to prison, and he would later decide what to do with him in the end. Luna was amazed. She couldn't believe that with just a word, Dad could manipulate a real demon like that. But she decided to keep this thing in mind. After a few hours, they finally got back to the estate, and Luna looked at her potential father and saw again a cold and reserved expression on his face. While they were walking, she was looking around the area, and then suddenly she saw a four-leaf clover in the garden. Of course, the moon immediately began to push itself out of his hands. The girl ran after she was able to get out of his arms. She grabbed him because she saw the same one in her past life. One day she heard words from a man who was very dear to her in a past life. This man said that if she takes this four-leaf clover, then luck will come when she is in pain. She didn't know who exactly said these words. However, she knew for sure that luck comes from pain. Her life in Korea, where she lived as a lonely orphan, was simply terrible, and she died just before her life began to improve. Luna was only convinced that her theory would work after death, but now she had an even more terrible fate. Not to live even to adulthood in a new body, in a new world. She had experienced a lot of pain, so now that she could control her destiny, she was determined to survive and use everything that might be required for this. She gave this clover to the man as a gift, and in the meantime, she came to the conclusion that she was ready to do anything, even use her own father. Meanwhile, Andy was leading the criminals towards the dungeon. The man decided to take advantage of the opportunity when the guy was thinking about something and attacked him. But he didn't care at all. He calmly hit him in the stomach and was able to get on top, and also advised the guy never to do that again. While Pluto was carrying the girl to her bedroom, he thought that her party should have been canceled because she would have been completely dangerous in a situation where she was being sought. But Luna insisted on her own. She had to go to this party because that was her plan since everyone else had canceled. She didn't even have to persuade him for long. After listening to the girl, he agreed and said that for now, his request was with the Chancellor, and he was going to carefully take part in organizing her party. Luna was incredibly shocked by this. However, the closer they got to her bedroom, the faster the maids ran, who were constantly worried from that moment on. They had already managed to wake up and, of course, gave the alarm that the princess was not there. Pluto scolded them and asked how they even allowed the girl to leave the palace. The maids did not know how to explain all this to them, so Luna wanted to protect them, because these girls were innocent after all, and she liked them. She couldn't think of anything better to do except burst into tears and say that her father was a terrible man. He panicked, of course. He didn't want to scare her. He asked her for forgiveness and promised that this would never happen again. He also said many other pleasant words just to calm her down. But before they could finish their conversation, another maid suddenly came to them and told them about an ancient tradition according to which daughters should stand next to their fathers on the anniversary of their birthday. And since Pluto could play this role, he needed to prepare a special suit and do it as quickly as possible, because the deadlines were tight. Before carrying her back to the room, the maid was asked to bring her a dress, so Luna was very happy because she continued to think about escaping. The girl did not object. However, when she headed towards the exit, she felt some kind of wind coming from the open window. Looking out, she saw that on the tower opposite, a man was sitting at a tremendous height, and at some point, he just took and jumped. Luna. Of course, she was very scared. At some point, she thought that she imagined it all, and there was no one there. But in the meantime, the maids had already returned, and she did not develop these thoughts. From that moment on, many hours passed, and when the next day finally arrived, they waited until midnight, dressed the moon in a beautiful formal dress, and congratulated the princess on her birthday. Halftone was holding her in his arms. He was also dressed in a smart uniform. Together, they looked simply amazing, like real father and daughter. The girl thought about the fact that all this was magic, because in her dreams, she so wanted to see this scene. However, in the plot, this did not happen. Therefore, she was upset. By that time, a lot of people had gathered around the clock tower. A man with his daughter in his arms jumped from there straight towards them, and the moon could not hold back her tears. For her, it was simply a delightful sight. But there in the crowd, she saw Andy and immediately waved hello to him. The girl was glad to see him. Meanwhile, an attractive man with long green hair approached them. He was one of the main supporting characters. His name was Eugene. He announced to all the guests the purpose of their gathering and also said that for those who showed their love on the occasion of little Luna's birthday, they had prepared a small gift for everyone. It was, of course, a princess party, and the so-called Easter surprises. Everyone could take part in an Easter egg hunt, in which small gifts were kept. Of course, these eggs were not real. These were special magical objects disguised as them. He told all the rules and where they could hide, but he also explained that they hid a special egg that could change the course of the game. It cost the most points. Luna actually listened to it all very attentively because she herself would like to play this game. These eggs contained magical powers, and when people found them, they could absorb this energy. The moon was very surprised. However, this was a really important skill for her. But the main prize was Princess Luna herself, and the opportunity to be her partner at the first dance at the banquet itself. After the rules of the game were announced, people immediately went their separate ways and began their search. The girl noticed how everyone was enjoying the party, and she was happy about it. She was also glad to hear that there were no particularly difficult conditions, and that as a reward, it was just a dance with her. While she was sitting at the banquet, Andy suddenly approached her. He had been looking for her all this time, because Pluto had been rather carefully taking her away from everyone in order to be alone with her as long as possible. But the man still found her. He said that he would definitely collect the largest number of eggs and become her dance partner, because that was what he wanted most of all. The men began to argue among themselves again, and Luna stood and watched everything that was happening. She realized that their reconciliation was definitely short-lived, and only for the purpose of catching the criminal. And while they were talking among themselves, the hotel chancellor Eugene approached them and wanted to greet the young princess personally. When the girl saw him in all his glory, she was very amazed. She did not expect that this minor character could turn out to be so cute. The man explained that he ordered the best wizards to investigate the lunar eclipse so he could see the memories of the princess being almost kidnapped and therefore leaving something incredible in the forest. In fact, the lunar eclipse that he spoke about symbolized life. But in this empire, they had the opposite meaning, and it meant death. In other words, he replaced the moon, an idiom that meant a corpse, so everyone around immediately understood what exactly he meant. During this dialogue, Luna learned that Andy had done something bad to this spy. However, she did not condemn him because she assumed that this man had done something terrible since the man had been subjected to violence. In the original story, he was supposed to die. If the girls managed to save the one who was destined to die, then this would mean that there was a possibility of changing fate. But unfortunately, this did not happen. Therefore, the hope that the moon had a chance to escape its death became less and less. She was in genuine despair because she understood that this could all really end badly for her. She didn't even know what plan of action she could come up with to correct this situation. Luna was also going to go in search of eggs. However, her two fathers began to insist that they go with her, but the girl said that she was now big and could do it on her own. Of course, the man liked me to realize this, and for some time they thought about not letting her do this because they had recently tried to kidnap her and everything like that. Luna knew all this very well, but continued to insist on her own because she desperately needed it. So Eugene decided to find a way out of this situation so that everyone would be calmer. He put a small egg in her hands, then said special words, and it disappeared. He explained that if something happened to her or she got lost, she had to say these words. Then the fireworks would take off and smile in the sky above the place where the princess is, and the lords would immediately run to her. Thus, her fathers should no longer have any objections about this. So the moon went off alone to look for those eggs, and the boys stayed there and continued to argue among themselves. When Eugene watched this and saw how the two of them were arguing, he realized for the first time that they had been talking to each other for so long, in a very long time. Sir Pluto was known as a demon on the battlefield, and Lord Andy, nicknamed Cerberus, they tried in the darkness for so long, but now they have changed so much that no one would take them for monsters. So Eugene assumed that the two had really changed, and it was all for the sake of the princess and her well-being, of course. While Luna was looking for eggs in the courtyard, a large crowd of knights and a man named Genie gathered. At that time, he was immobilized knight commander, that is Pluto, and was awaiting orders. Even though the man had only just risen from an inexperienced soldier to a full-fledged knight, he was well aware of this man's bad reputation. He was a demon on the battlefield, a beautiful but cold-blooded demon, the Blue Falcon, who drank the blood of others without even thinking. There were many frightening nicknames that described the plateau in this way, but it was still a great honor for the man to be next to him. And he was nervous, not because he was afraid of him. This is what the senior knights have been talking about since the moment you, Wiles, the commander of the knights, your life no longer belongs to you. When the knight saw his commander in person, he blushed all over. He simply fell in love with him, so he was already eagerly awaiting instructions from Pluto in order to do everything for him. In fact, the man ordered them to hunt for eggs because he wanted to receive this reward and dance with his daughter. But the other knights began to think differently. They could not believe that the demon himself wanted to get these eggs only in order to dance with the princess. They assumed that the eggs were bombs and began spreading completely false information. But in the end, after a few minutes, these knights started hunting for Easter eggs with their eyes wide open, because they realized that they now had the profession of a sapper. Meanwhile, the moon was successfully conducting its search. It had already found several eggs and absorbed them. In fact, since she knew the plot of the story, she also knew where these eggs were. Andy was able to bring absolutely everything, but he only didn't find two. The only thing he couldn't find was the hidden egg, and also the transformation egg. The transformation egg was discovered in front of Artemis's palace after the end of the game, so Luna was absolutely sure that it wasn't there initially, it appeared later. This egg allowed her to borrow someone else's image, the main priority for her escape, so she had to find it and carry out her plan. While she was sitting on a tree collecting eggs from the nests of chicks, she saw a small child approaching her below. He carried some large bird in his arms and talked to it. The moon was very surprised to see this child. However, he was simply beautiful. He was a truly beautiful, fair-haired and golden-eyed boy. But then, for some reason, the girl suddenly had the feeling that she had seen an ugly boy, but a real miracle of Mother Nature. But after thinking a little, she realized where she could have seen this man before. This is the great dragon myth Puer, Prometheus the third candidate for the Fathers of the Moon. She was so taken aback by his beauty that she didn't even have time to realize this fact. Meanwhile, the boy had already noticed the girl and began to tell her something about the chicks. She practically didn't even hear this. She was very interested in what was happening, and the fall decided that she was helping the baby monsters, so she asked if he didn't feel sorry for them. Just because the parents were dead, the babies could not survive. This was mean in her opinion, because the girl essentially experienced their fate. The birds they talked about were called PKLs, and they were basically the real monsters in the story. Pueli are monsters whose males possess strong, paternal love and have a precious heart. Since good gems can only be found in adults, people made every effort to raise them and their chicks, although this always ends in failure, because they cannot be tamed. And that is why the orphaned chicks simply died the most miserable death that could be imagined for them. Luna knew all this very well. However, turning to the guy, she asked, "Are they really destined to die immediately after birth, simply because they can't do anything about their fate?" In all this, she saw herself and knowledge did not determine her choice. She knew that she had to die. However, she did not want this, but she also did not know how to fix it. The boy listened to her and told her about one legend about the most noble girl with a beautiful heart who could tame even an evil Puel. He lived for many years, but had never met a girl who could come to terms with these creatures. But Luna was able to calmly communicate with them and find an egg there, so the guy was amazed. At that moment, she grabbed this nest with eggs because she was the only person who was able to tame small creatures. She jumped straight from the tree. The girl thought that she would crash, but fortunately, this did not happen. She simply could not take her eyes off him because he was truly beautiful. A myth that usually seals its powers and appears as a child becoming an adult when using mana. And that is exactly what he did at that moment in order to save the girl. After everything calmed down, he kissed her right on the forehead and gave her a lot of compliments, and also said how much he admired her kindness. After he placed Luna back on the ground, he immediately disappeared. But before that, he told her instructions on how she could meet him again. The girl didn't expect that their acquaintance would be so quick, but under the tree she saw another egg. It was Daphne's mask. Now the girl could copy the face of a person within a radius of 500 meters. It was the very same transformation egg that Luna incredibly needed, so she was happy. But then suddenly, the girl heard someone start to walk past her. She quickly hid in the bushes and heard a conversation from the girls. They were saying something about these eggs and mentioned that these eggs were bombs. The girls began to fear that they were in danger and all that sort of thing. But in fact, they believed that Pluto would be able to protect them, since he also went on an active search. Luna understood perfectly well why he started looking for these eggs, but she still hoped that it was just a rumor. After that, she decided to take advantage of this wonderful opportunity and transformed herself into one of these aristocrats. Now she was a blonde in a pink dress. Luna continued to hold the nest with chicks in her arms, and her second suspected father at that moment was sitting nearby and watching her, wondering what she was planning. After all, he understood that it was not without reason that the girl used transformation magic. He hadn't felt the same feelings he felt near the moon for a long time, and this hadn't happened even once since Athena died. He thought about the cherished daughter of dragons and really hoped that she would be able to find Athena's gift, and he himself was simply going to accompany her on this path. But Luna was very upset because, despite the fact that she found the egg of reincarnation, she was going to find others, of course. Eddie told about everyone. However, the secret egg was found by Hercules, and he never talked about where exactly it was. All he talked about was that he found it while returning a fallen chick back to the nest. So Luna didn't understand how she could have found this egg at all. And while she was wandering mindlessly through the forest, not far from her, she saw the very same Hercules who was helping the chicks. He had soft brown hair and eyes like a small fawn, and a build as large as a bear. He held the tiny chick in his big, strong hands, so Luna realized that it was indeed Hercules, the last candidate to become her father. And she just looked at him for a while, because he was as beautiful as Pluto and Andy. The man immediately noticed this girl. He had to find out why she was watching him so intently. Therefore, having come down from the tree, he immediately turned to the girl and realized that she was looking for eggs. He also tried to talk to her, but Luna did not answer him. Therefore, he assumed that she was from another kingdom and therefore did not understand at all what he was saying. Then Hercules spoke in a completely different language. He tried several of them in order to find a common language with her. The girl continued to remain silent because she did not know what to do. But that was the whole charm of Hercules. He was both muscular and smart, a handsome man. This guy is so smart that he could have realized his dream of becoming a student if it weren't for family problems that stopped him. Then the guy grabbed her hand and gestured to her that he would take her back to the banquet so that she wouldn't get lost in the forest even more. The girl did not resist, and despite the fact that his hand was large and rough, she was pleased that he decided to take care of her. Hercules also started talking to himself because he thought that the moon did not understand him. He considered himself an idiot because he searched everywhere, but still did not find a single egg. Upon hearing this, she was shocked because according to the original story, Hercules was supposed to find the most special egg, but then she finds out that this did not happen. Of course, it could have been because of her sudden appearance that he found him. After being rescued, the bird looked into the nest. But now, because the moon distracted him from this body, the plot changed and he never found this egg. Of course, for the girl, it was just a wonderful opportunity. She could calmly go back and pick him up. Hercules continued to blame himself and even laughed because he did not know what else he could do to get closer to his daughter and considered himself a terrible father. Now that he had missed his chance, he couldn't stop thinking about why he was so helpless. Looney was unpleasant to hear all this, so she stopped abruptly. He had calloused hands and no special skills other than being well-read. However, despite all his failures, he moved forward, doing everything possible, so he was definitely like a bear. And now she realized that all these stupid efforts in searching for the egg should have led to the fact that he would find the secret egg and defeat Andy so that he could communicate with his potential daughter. But instead, he would simply lose to her, to the man who was deceiving him. Looney was not very pleased about this. Therefore, she grabbed his hand and began to lead him back, telling him not to ask unnecessary questions. They ran back to the same place, and she said that they needed to find the egg. She really wanted Hercules to find the secret egg. And she also wanted him to know that with Tanya, trying with all his might sometimes pays off even in such a cruel world. When they reached the right place, Luna quickly jumped up to the chicks. She looked at all the eggs and tried to touch them, because she had to appear at the moment when she directly makes physical contact. But there was only one chick there. He started screaming loudly, and the moon. Now she realized that this bird looked a little strange after that. she heard a loud growl not far from her. Turning her head to the side, Luna saw a huge golden eye that was looking straight at her and was hostile. Then the girl realized that it was the mother of the puli, a huge, monstrous bird, many meters in height. The bird easily grabbed the moon and began to fly away in order to deal with its victim. Of course, Hercules ran to save her. He ran incredibly fast and soon managed to hit the bird, but she didn't care. So he simply grabbed her tail before he fell. But they were both in despair, because being high in the air, none of them could do anything, because otherwise the bird would let them go, and they would simply fall to the ground. And from such a height, they would not survive this impact. Some time passed from that moment. The bird brought them to some distant dark place and released the two of them. And after that, it took and flew away. They both didn't understand why she did it. However, Hercules believed that they should take advantage of this opportunity and leave as soon as possible. The man immediately began to walk forward. However, Luna explained to him that this bird was a magical creature, and they could not leave this place until she allowed them to do so. She understood how dangerous this could be, and explained to him that the bird thought that they were trying to steal her babies, and therefore began to defend itself. Luna read this story from cover to cover and knew everything about this world. However, there was only one way to get out of the female's nest where they ended up. She had to give her permission. Hercules was delighted. He believed that they could easily get it. However, for a moment there was no mention of other possible ways to escape from the Puli nest. But the girl believed that killing the bird could solve their problems. She believed that if this bird cast the curse, then when it dies, this barrier will also disappear. Hercules agreed with her, but he was afraid because it could be really risky, but they simply had no other choice. Puli always brought food to their nests before eating it, and in this situation, this couple was just their food. She asked Hercules for forgiveness for involving him in all this. However, the man was not against dealing with this bird as soon as she returned, because she felt it was her duty. Meanwhile, Luna was getting ready to look for food for them, but she knew that the effect of her egg would soon end, and she would return to her normal appearance. Meanwhile, in the forest, the knights were actively continuing to search for the eggs. They were absolutely convinced that these eggs were bombs, and therefore poor Sir John was incredibly scared. But Pluto, who was with them on the mission, paid no attention to the new recruits at all. They irritated him even more than in all the previous years. Well, there was nothing he could do. Then, raising his head up, he saw something strange. It was shining and looked very attractive. The man soon guessed what exactly it was. He turned to all the knights and said that he had found the secret egg. Meanwhile, Luna was in real despair. She couldn't figure out how to tell her so that Hercules wouldn't notice who she had turned back into and wouldn't understand why she was doing it. The man went off to look for food, as she had expected, now that the barrier was growing. Damn! Hercules could move a few meters away from the entrance to this cave. He might not even try to move away a long distance, because this barrier would return him to his starting point. Escape for Luna was actually very easy. She just needed to launch the rocket that her genie gave her. However, if she did this, she wouldn't be able to escape at all because of this story. Well, then suddenly she heard some sounds behind her. The girl went deeper into the cave and saw a huge egg there, as well as a bird. Luna realized that it probably belonged to the female of this dust, and usually only 1 out of 10 of them hatched. Unlike males who devoted themselves to caring for the offspring, females abandoned their eggs immediately after laying them. The only time a female actively cares for her offspring is when the chick is also born to a female. A few days after hatching, the female of this breed reaches maturity and flies away to find a mate. So Luna understood that this was her chance. The barrier would temporarily disappear if she killed the chick of this pule, and they all established telepathic connections with their offspring for better protection. And this meant that she would have time to leave, while the mother bird panicked over the death of her chick. And when the moon came closer to this chick, he immediately opened his eye. However, instead of a red bird, a small child appeared there. But in the meantime, Hercules had already returned with his hunt. He saw that she was trying to pet this chick. However, he advised her to be careful. The moon was amazed. After all, when she turned to look at the nest the next time, she saw an ordinary chick there. This fleeting vision lasted only a second. And now this fleeting image of herself when she was little in the monster changed her attitude towards her. Now her life was at stake, and therefore there was no time to show pity. The man handed her his catch. They were rather strange mushrooms. Luna suddenly decided to give a motivational speech. She said people walk over heads to achieve their goals. This was another truth she learned while she was an orphan. If people in power want it, the weak will easily become victims. The world has never been merciful, and that's why the girl is too. She was capable of harming an innocent creature in order to save her own skin, and because of this, she felt bad. She didn't want it because it was wrong, but she didn't know what other choice she had. Hercules saw despair in her eyes. This calmed her down. He said that he would do all the dirty work for her, but the girl didn't answer. She only said that he could eat first, and she went for a walk and cleared her thoughts. Then she saw the very mushroom that Hercules had found. This mushroom was edible, but if you crush it into powder along with the plants growing around it, you can make something that could easily kill this chick. Luna was amazed at how naive and trusting Hercules was. Because of this, she considered him an idiot and realized that he would not last that long in life. And while she was picking mushrooms, she heard a chick crying. The girl immediately ran to the cliff and saw a baby there who was screaming. He fell from the cliff, but now she understood what was going on. In very rare cases, it happens that females show affection for male chicks, and since she has lost a female chick, the dustbird goes to the nest of her partner and checks to see if there is a male chick left there. The mother thought her chick had died, but in reality, he simply couldn't fly the first time he tried to, so he fell and stayed down there. Luna wanted to help this chick because she believed that this way they would be saved. But as soon as she lowered her hand down, she did not touch the baby. Her hand passed through a barrier that was very cruel, and now her palm was in the cave where Hercules remained. And at that moment, the moon realized that she didn't even understand why she decided to save this unfortunate bird. Because a minute ago, she was thinking about murder. For her, it was all very strange. No one had ever tried to save her. Therefore, she had no reason to do this. For Luna, killing the chick was the best option because she wanted to escape before turning back into a princess. However, for some reason, she couldn't overcome the feeling that she was doing something wrong. If she hadn't found this chick, it would have died anyway. And then suddenly, the moon was incredibly angry with itself. She couldn't believe that she had actually said something like that about an innocent little life. So the girl was now in a serious mood. She called Hercules, who came running in an instant and said that she needed his sword. She took it and immediately threw it somewhere to the side. After that, she started hitting it with flew. In fact, she needed scissors, not a sword of dust. She adored the smell of the Paranonian mushroom that she found in the forest. And the moon could not save the chick with just a stick. However, she believed that she could perhaps do this with a sheath made of magical leather. The girl began to put her plan into action and said that they would most likely be able to get out of this place without killing anyone. She just needed to do what she did. In the end, she finally got to the chick, and he immediately bit the thing. But upon hearing Luna's voice, she suddenly became frightened and immediately let it go. The slope beneath the girl began to collapse, and she realized that she was about to fall and die. But in the end, Luna was able to save this chick while she was falling herself. This baby flew. For her, it was incredibly happy to see how he flew. Luna thought she would die and realized that taking off or crashing were controversial situations, but they always came down to life or death. But it was a great happiness for her to realize that even though this bird was weak, it could now fly. In the end, there was no such thing as a predetermined death. It could always be escaped with the help of other people, for example. But Luna considered this situation unfair because she did not have wings. But even despite this, she was happy that at least the chick remained alive. For her, this was already important. In any case, she always failed even in her past life, so she didn't learn anything new for herself. And so, for a few minutes while the moon was falling, she heard the voice of Hercules, who, leaning down from the slope, began to extend his hand to her. He was going to save her and was eventually able to grab Luna after that he himself fell. However, he grabbed the girl so that the entire impact when they landed on the ground fell on him. They flew quite quickly, and when they found themselves at the bottom, Luna opened her eyes and noticed that they were not in the abyss, but had somehow returned back to the cave. Of course, it was obvious that all this was thanks to the barrier, and the moon was happy that everything worked out, and no one died. Hercules himself laughed when he saw that all his actions were in vain. He tried to act like a hero and save her. However, as always, he turned out to be useless because the girl would not have been able to harm herself because of this barrier. Luna herself understood this. However, she felt incredibly sorry for the man because in the original story, he was the one who found the secret egg and turned out to be a very important character in the story. She didn't have time to console her potential father in any way because Puili returned to the cave and the man immediately stood in front of the girl in order to protect her. But Luna had to find a way to let this mother know that her chick was now safe. In the end, the bird did not attack them. It landed at the entrance to the cave and screamed loudly. Then they looked more closely and saw a small baby next to the mother. They guessed that it was a cry of joy. After that, the bird melted and gave the people the opportunity to leave. The moon was amazed, but then, thinking, she realized that the females were very rare. But still, there were 3 of them in this cave. Something was definitely not right there, and she intended to find out. The girl returned back to the nest and looked at this egg. Despite the fact that they were very far from the castle, they were still on its territory, so she looked at this egg with suspicion. Hercules said that he found a secret egg on the way back after returning the fallen chick back to the nest. But he didn't say which chick he saved, so the moon understood that he was a kind-hearted and a little simple-minded person. However, he thought that it was a monster, the good-natured chick, and helped him. Then she took this egg, and she was congratulated on receiving the secret egg of the queen, and called her the bravest and most noble person in these lands. Luna fulfilled the queen's will and helped create a new page in the history of Asteria. Luna was very angry with Eugene because she did not understand how he could say that this egg was hidden on the Asterian lands if it was hidden in a completely remote and unfamiliar place. Because of this, she was very angry with him. But then suddenly, she heard the voice of Hercules, who burst into tears and said that the girl was able to find him. He began to call her an amazing lady and said that she was amazing. Luna herself smiled. She understood that he incredibly wanted to find this egg, and yet he congratulated her without the slightest hint of envy. This man was truly delightful. He is very kind and simple, and is not capable of offending anyone, so she decided to give this egg directly to him. Of course, Hercules began to refuse and said that the girl deserved him. And besides, he believed that it would be better if she stayed with her than with him, at least for some time. He would be slow and stupid, so he couldn't find it alone. But Luna explained that this was his gift. He was always very kind, and therefore, like no one else, he deserved this prize. She simply decided to give this egg to Hercules as a gift of gratitude, and at that very moment, the moon's magic ended, and she turned back into a princess. Luna was in a panic. She didn't know what to do, but Hercules didn't immediately understand what exactly had happened. In fact, he was really having a hard time processing the information in his brain. Therefore, she still had time. Even though her escape plan had failed, she could still help him win. But to do so, they needed to return to the castle before sunset. Hercules himself understood that they would not have time to return. However, he was still incredibly grateful to her. Luna, meanwhile, began to mutter something to herself with her eyes closed. In fact, she took advantage of the advice that her third possible candidate for father had given her. A myth appeared before them. A man had a nest with chicks in his hands, and he decided to give them back to the mother, since males usually do not take care of their offspring. He then approached the girl and asked if she remembered what gift she had asked him for. Hercules, hearing about this, was immediately delighted. He understood that she had come all this way to celebrate her birthday and asked what the princess had asked for in the end. Luna didn't know what to do, as she decided to just go with the flow. So she grabbed her dragon by the hand, and he immediately turned into a creature instead of a man. The man explained that it was a belated gift from her father. She had always admired the sky, so he decided to take her for a ride. Together with Hercules, they sat on the back of this dragon. The moon was very afraid. She could not believe that her character actually asked the myth to give her a ride on his back. But soon she was able to open her eyes, plucking up her courage, and saw beautiful trees that sparkled like precious stones under the rays of the sun rising from behind the horizon, and also the clear early morning sky that stood golden, pushing away the night darkness. It was a truly breathtaking view. Luna understood that she probably looked shocked. And at that moment, but she didn't care. She practically didn't even listen to Hercules. She only heard that he gave her a few compliments and continued to admire the girls. Of course, it was very difficult not to admire her because she was so sweet. However, Luna still did not understand why, even when they were alone. He kept his distance from her and was afraid to call himself a father. However, it was obvious, because Luna quite often reminded him of the queen, who in turn was very similar to Puili. He immediately remembered how before lunch they spent time together in bed and were distracted. The man was really in love with this woman, even realizing the fact that he was not alone with her. Even if he was a little timid, Hercules still wanted to play with such a playful queen. However, he did not understand why he suddenly remembered this after so many years, and especially looking at his possible daughter. The man was most likely simply too happy at that moment, and that is why he remembered his long-forgotten happiness in the past. He tried with all his might to forget these memories in order to hide his sadness. The mischievous queen had planned everything from the very beginning, and he understood it perfectly well. Once in a distant memory, it was she who spoke about how the male dust continues to protect his cubs, even when his heart was torn out of his chest. And that is why he swore to his queen that he would always protect this little one, even though it was incredibly painful for him just to look at her. He always remembered his love, and because of this, he was tormented by doubts. Meanwhile, many people had already gathered near the palace. The presenter announced the result, since only 2 people were able to find the eggs, so they had to determine the winner. The first was Sir Andy. He found 4 eggs, so he was really quite a strong candidate for victory. But the next one was the semitone. He only had 5 eggs. However, he dropped one of them while approaching the presenter. The man explained that it was difficult for him to hold all 5 in his hands, and because of this, it was quite obvious that he dropped one of them. His knights, meanwhile, began to mock Andy, and were proud that the man offered to help them with this, because it was so nice to see the victory. Of course, Andy didn't like all this and started accusing the man of cheating. After all, he had to look for the eggs himself. But Pluto, of course, didn't consider this a scam, because it was his strategy. And while they continued arguing, the man took out the secret egg and said that he couldn't even swallow it. It was so delicious. The presenter, seeing this, immediately became wary. He did not understand where Pluto had found it, since Eugene had hidden it so that no one could find it. But the guy explained where exactly he found it. But then suddenly, a little boy ran out of the crowd and said that the man had found his ball and was happy about it. Of course he was very angry, you see. He really thought that this was a secret egg. In the end, he gave the egg to the boy and was so angry that he could have been fooled so easily. But he didn't get upset because even without the secret egg, he still found more than Andy. Then Jean was already going to announce the results after all the details were clarified. But before she could say a word, John suddenly turned to them. He said that it was all somehow strange. There were 12 eggs. The secret egg was genuine, so they must have had 9 eggs, including Sir Andy's. After that, he thought about it and said that it turned out that the remaining 3 eggs were bombs. People, upon hearing this, immediately began to be indignant. Pluto watched their reaction and thought that this year he had clearly gathered some kind of bunch of idiots. In a calm voice, he explained that there were no bombs at all, and I didn't understand where they got such a theory from. But the knights didn't even have time to understand anything because they saw a dragon with silvery white scales in the air. Pluto immediately understood who it was, just like everyone else. The myth landed not far from them, after which Hercules descended from above, along with the princess, and showed his secret egg with a smile on his face. He asked if the game was still over. Yujin was very amazed when he saw the princess, but when he looked at the secret egg, he was even more surprised. But of course, he had no right not to announce Hercules as the winner, so he did just that. Everyone present was very surprised, but of course Pluto and Andy were the most upset. After all, they were counting on this victory. In any case, after this competition, a dance ball was supposed to begin at the festive banquet. All the guests immediately rejoiced at this and went to their chambers to quickly change clothes for this event. Ilona did the same. She dressed in the same color as Eugene's suit, and they performed their first dance. The stop at this banquet was incredibly tense, but soon many people relaxed and began to simply dance and enjoy the event. In order for Looney to dance comfortably with Hercules, She had to stand on his toes to be at least a little taller due to the difference in height. In the end, she thought about the fact that it must have been quite difficult for him to bear her, because even though she was a child, she still weighed a lot, so she decided to save herself. And while she was lowering her legs, she accidentally tripped and almost fell. Fortunately, this did not happen because the myth managed to catch her in the air with his magic in time. He smiled happily and said that she fell because she tripped because the space was very small. He wanted to send them onto the stage because it would have suited them perfectly. After this, with just one click, he lifted Hercules up, and the man immediately hugged the girl, and they began to dance in the air. Of course, she didn't like all this. She was scared. However, the man tried to calm her down. Hercules said that she could open her eyes and not be afraid. He held her, and the view was simply amazing. And it was really true. Luna, seeing all this, was delighted. The man then bowed politely and asked if the princess had thought that since they were already in such a delightful place, they should take the opportunity to dance. In the original, there was never a scene like this. In the book, they danced on the ground, so she didn't even know what to do. She lowered her head down, and the moon saw the imperial palace. It seemed like a toy from this view, but it was just a fantasy world, so she decided to take advantage of the opportunity and at least try to establish contact with Hercules. She thought that creating a few happy memories while she was in this world would be nice, so they enjoyed the moment while her other father candidates envied them standing on Earth. And while they were not dancing, Luna heard Andy's voice behind her. He said that he asked Sir Myth to lift him into the air so that he could also dance with the princess. And from that moment on, she will dance with him. The man, as always, did not understand anything. He was glad that Andy decided to take care of the princess, and even burst into tears of happiness. But after that, their conversation was interrupted by a myth that also rose into the air. He said that he also demanded dancing. He was the one who raised Hercules to this place, so it was he who contributed to his victory. And the man believed that he had no less a right to dance with them while they argued. Everything in the air, Pluto began to rise to the very top of the tower. He was going to keep an eye on her because he knew that it was much more dangerous in the air than on the ground. She could catch a cold because of the strong wind, or a bird could crash into her. Well, when Pluto was at the top, he saw a picture that broke his heart. 3 potential fathers of the girl were in the air, and the myth was dancing with the moon. She looked happy. Because of this, he was even more upset. After all, he would like to be in this place. It all seemed like a happy scene from a fairy tale to him. But in fact, it was difficult for him to get used to such things. His mother always humiliated him, and men were still on the sidelines as a father to their child. And now memories from the past began to come to his mind about how his mother blamed him for the birth. He saw a tangible picture, namely, how the moon began to fall down and no one was holding it anymore. The man reacted in time and ran up to her. Even though he was now falling along with the girl, he grabbed her, because for him, it was all a trifle. He felt that he had to save her at any cost, and that is exactly what he did. And when they were almost near the earth, the myth flew up and stopped their fall. He asked if everything was okay with them, and if they were all right. Pluto immediately started yelling at him and calling him names. He didn't understand how the man dared to lift the girl so high without thinking about how dangerous it could be, because she could get seriously hurt, and it would all be because of him. But the man explained that he had sworn to Athena that he would protect this child, and had already used several protective spells. His wind had saved her faster than any human could, so she was completely safe. After that, he snapped his fingers again, and they began to rise upward. The myth advised the guy to just relax and enjoy this beautiful view. When Pluto looked around, he really saw a beautiful sunset. Luna herself tried to calm him down. And after that, she invited him to dance. The man found this incredibly pleasant and immediately began to dance with her. In fact, this fall was not an accident at all. The myth sensed evil energy in this egg and realized that someone was hunting the princess. Luckily, he managed to clear it, and everything worked out while Luna was dancing with the man. She noticed that his face was rather gloomy. However, he still did it like a professional. After the egg was cleaned, the myth flew up and gave it to her. The girl immediately thanked him and said that she would be careful and try not to drop it down again. It was quite cool in the sky, but the egg was quite warm. The girl accidentally sneezed and dropped the egg again. The men who specially enchanted this egg are talking among themselves. They were going to do everything to make sure that it was this man who had conceived this whole plan who would become emperor. When the egg fell again, it hit straight on the roof. Eugene said that it was definitely a magical item of Queen Athena. It would have been finished with him if the egg had fallen on him, so he was happy that everything worked out. At that moment, for some reason, Luna felt terrible. Of course, Eugene wouldn't have gotten hurt, because he was a talented chancellor of Asteria and a magician, and could easily create a shield to protect himself and everyone else. It wouldn't even be difficult for him. It was not without reason that he was chosen as an assistant to someone like Athena. However, she still felt awkward about having missed this egg and could, in theory, have hurt someone. Meanwhile, they all landed down. Eugene looked at the egg that opened and saw that there was something unusual inside. It was a note. When he picked it up and read it, it was very good. This note named all the Hercules of the myth of Pluto Andy and said that the person who wrote this note dedicated these 4 to the candidates for the name of the princess's father. Of course, after this, everyone was amazed. Luna spent only 1 day in this fantasy world. However, history still continued to approach her, and she realized that she most likely would not be able to avoid it in any way. They all received favor around the time the queen became pregnant with Princess Artemis, and all candidates are to be treated equally as her fathers, regardless of title or age. So it was said that if they performed poorly as fathers, the princess would later be able to remove them from the list of candidates. And they were all given the mission of finding 4 sacred objects that she left behind. The first item was the Cup of Flowers, also the crystal branch of Olympus, the dragon crystal, and a robe made of salamander skin. And while the search was going on, Princess Diana Stella Asteria had to evaluate the wisdom and courage of the candidates in order to choose the next emperor. And the chosen candidate was also supposed to become the princess's father and the ruler of their country. Also, the moons were advised not to make a choice based only on their appearance. She had to act rationally and think about everything. When the men heard this, they were so shocked that they didn't even have time to say anything. Those present heard the contents of this note and were themselves in shock. Opinions were divided. People immediately began to think about who exactly deserved to become emperor, as well as who was most likely to be the girl's father. Despite how ridiculous it all was, people did not object as much as Luna expected. After all, one of the candidates is the one people want to put on the imperial throne. Many were unhappy with the imperial regent because he was very unintelligent, especially considering that the previous empress was monstrously capable. Many argued that the commander of the knights should have become emperor. After all, it was he who overthrew the tyrant Demios and made the greatest contribution to the formation of the empire. But be that as it may, the people in power decided that there had to be a certain post of regent until the coming-of-age ceremony of Princess Artemis. Of course, even Looney understood that all this was a simple pretext. They wanted to usurp the throne and get rid of the girl, so she was determined to seriously resolve this issue. At that moment, after the celebration ended, Luna was helped by the maid to change into her dress, which was specially made for this evening, one that was both suitable and elegant. And when the girl was about to leave the room, someone knocked. The door opened, and that person turned out to be Cupid. He asked her for forgiveness for not being able to come to her birthday celebration and greeted the girl. The maids immediately ran up to him and began asking him what had happened to him and how he had spent his time, since they had heard some rumors. Cupid explained that he felt very embarrassed and ashamed that the princess was in danger because he believed that it was partly his fault. Luna knew he was back immediately after she heard the kidnapping as in the original stories, and she was finally able to meet the real him. However, this man was quite fanatical because he was ready to sacrifice his life in order to pay for the sin that happened. As Luna had predicted, the imperial regent Potus, who was a distant relative of Athena, was incredibly evil and wanted to get rid of the girl and all of her candidates. His assistants were going to do everything to ensure that the man succeeded, and they didn't even want to stand on ceremony. They could manipulate public opinion so that people would think that the princess was incapable of choosing a suitable emperor. Several hours had passed since Cupid had returned to the estate, and he had finally calmed down and stopped reproaching himself for what had happened to the moon, and he also did not want to punish himself anymore. The man handed her this egg, which appeared in his hands with the help of a spell, and explained that it was a memorable gift from the queen, that is, her mother. The chancellor examined it. After she fell earlier, he made sure that it was not broken and asked to give it to the girl. Luna turned to her assistant and said that this egg was strange because she absorbed all the others when the man touched it and thought about this unusual thing himself. Because since she had Mona from the queen, she should have been able to do this with ease. But of course, most likely because the girl was not a real moon, she could not do this. However, in her opinion, it should still work since she was in the body of this character. Cupid even began to worry that she had some kind of cold or something like that. Luna refused to call a doctor. Although he insisted, she simply had to find out why she couldn't use magic, because it was quite strange. After this, Luna decided to find out from Cupid why Pluto hated Andy so much. It was beneficial for her to change the subject of the conversation and to learn more about these two. The man agreed with her and said that Pluto does not discriminate against other people either. And when it came to him, he could only share his assumptions about this, since he did not know reliable information. In fact, he told the girl a heart-rending story about the first meeting of him and Eddie, when he thought that the queen was simply good-natured and saved a man from a brothel. But in the end, he saw that there was some kind of emotional connection between them. Because of this, he was simply upset. Sometimes he even wanted to smash his past self's head. However, he could not do anything about the fact that he was completely captivated by the charms of Athena, because if it were not for the queen, he would probably have become this sorceress for another person. This would not have been possible. He simply became too sentimental, and all sorts of terrible thoughts came into his head, because a new person had appeared in the queen's entourage, and he had not seen her for a long time. Then Luna learned that Andy was a master of seduction and did not let the queen go for a moment, and Pluto was so worried that the sight even broke Cupid's own heart. Now the girl understood why Pluto really wanted to kill him, because despite being one of the main characters of the story, he acted just like a sarcastic watchwoman, so sometimes Andy irritated even Luna. But her knights said that he respected them both equally as good commanders and knights. Well, it just turned out that he liked Iru Andy more, that's all. At that moment, the guy suddenly heard some strange sounds. He abruptly jumped up from his seat, placed the girl behind him, and, throwing the weapon at the wall, told the criminal to show himself. This picture could be shocking. Well, Luna was already used to it, because despite the fact that from the outside the guy looked gentle, we were completely innocent. In fact, he was the former king of a gang of thieves. He had a hard life before Athena brought him to this place. He is ready to immediately sacrifice himself for the moon and mercilessly destroy all enemies in his path. However, this was not in the original, and because of this, she was very wary. Ignorance was simply killing her. Well, she even suggested that she had brought her death closer by trying to change the storyline, and that was what she feared most. But in fact, when the door opened, they saw that it was not a criminal at all, but Eugene, who had a magical recording device in his hands, so Cupid still treated him with suspicion. The guy nervously laughed and explained that his innocent heart wanted to capture the touching reunion of the sweet moon princess and her faithful knight. The maids were also shocked by what the man did, and they took the recording device from him. And Cupid thought that it was all strange, because the man said that he would be present at Princess Luna's test, but at the same time, he wanted him to be the one to give her the egg then. The girl wasn't interested in their squabbles. She was thinking about the test that was mentioned in the conversation. Even though the royal diary entries were very detailed, and of course some events were missed, she was therefore interested in what they were talking about. Eugene immediately explained that he taught her magic because she said she wanted it, and the time had finally come when he would conduct a special test to check her progress. And when the next day came, the man actually gave her this test. The girl really hoped that it would not be difficult, because she was, after all, a 7-year-old child, so she did not think that they would give her any impossible questions. But even after opening the first task, she was amazed. Luna began to think about the fact that these medieval people were too smart with their level of development of science and technology. But then she collected her thoughts and realized that everything was not so simple. They touched on magic and ordinary things, but these were basic concepts of dynamics. So for a modern person, it was easy for her to solve this. Ultimately, this test reminded her of something, namely a suspicious event that happened a week before her death in that life. Then she spent too much on books and now she had too little money left. She would really like to find a place where she could find comics about fantasy and love for free so as not to spend her entire salary there. And then she saw a notification. She received a coupon that was supposed to expire in a week. She could read all the chapters of one story for free. Luna was certainly delighted and accepted the offer. This coupon was too good to be true, and so she had to be more suspicious, but she ultimately just jumped at the chance and took advantage of it. In the end, it was revealed that the mother of the Aspen was the evil youth. She told her the queen mixed with pride and took her place. Because of the way she sparkled, the previous queen was nicknamed Witches by everyone. King Peter, faced with an extremely negative reaction to his desire to marry Juno, wanted her to bear him a son. She gave birth to Athena, the so-called daughter of the witch, and after giving birth to her, Queen Una was unable to fully recover, and after numerous miscarriages, the cruel king simply executed her. Later, he sent Athena as far away as possible. Not wanting to see even her shadow, he locked her in a village that was very far from the castle. When the moon reached this part of the story in that life, she thought that the tyrannic king wanted to improve his relationship with his daughter. But suddenly, the author began a completely different kind of plot that amazed her. Athena's father forced her to lose all faith and trust in men, so she began to neglect them. Worse than that, King Jupiter was defeated, killed by a traitor named Deimos. Volume 1. This story started with a sad story about a princess abandoned alone in a village by her father, who ignored her. But the plot twist happened when she avenged her father's death and defeated the tyrant. As a result, after the incident, she acquired young men and fulfilled her desire to live a luxurious life in a reverse harem. At that time, she gave birth to Princess Artemis. She never wrote about it, and her father seemed to be worried that someone could read her diary. This story was very strange for the girl. However, she was interested in who the father was, so she decided to read another chapter before going to bed. Despite the fact that she had already done this for a long time, this is how she learned that all 4 sacred things were finally prepared, and the death of the queen was unfortunately inevitable. This sentence marked the end of the first volume. She continued to follow the plot as if she were sailing on a boat. After scrolling a little, she realized that the writing style had completely changed. The first volume was disorganized. There were plot holes, but the second one was well put together and much better thought out. She had the impression that someone else had written it. Previously, she thought that the authors had done a good job. However, now that she found herself in this world, she realized that this was not the case. And so when she got to the last chapter, she really wanted to know who the father was and how it all ended. But in the end, she learned that Princess Luna was killed by the British Army, and her princesses shared common unfinished business. All this was the result of the British invasion. The story was always written in the first person, but then suddenly everything changed and became an even more terrible ending. But even despite this, Luna returned to the beginning that evening and read everything to the end, because access was free after all, and she had nothing to do. For some reason, she had a very clear feeling that she had to read it all and remember even the smallest details at that moment. She didn't even suspect what it could be connected with. After that, she tried to find something about this story in the browser, but everything was to no avail. And after a week of active reading and searching, the girl eventually simply died. While she was writing her test, Luna suddenly saw herself from her past life in the same form in which she died. It was quite strange, but there was nothing better than talking to myself when you want to put your thoughts in order. Of course, it all happened in her head. She just had a good imagination. This young girl who sat opposite her was her superego. In other words, her imaginary friend, and she had to talk to her in order to unload at least some of her thoughts. Luna knew that she had created it herself. However, it was difficult to be around her. She was a reflection of all the girl's mistakes and weaknesses. She made her a cynical, selfish, and lonely coward, as people usually do when they believe that they always think. They try to suppress and forget some thoughts, but they always come back. So Luna found another way to deal with it. And the first question to her own self was why she was reborn as the main character of the novel. Then the girl said that everything that a person creates, one way or another, originates from the memories of his past life. And as she already knew, the world from the royal diary, that is, the novella she found herself in, could very well actually exist. Despite the fact that it was difficult to describe the subconscious memory in detail, the second part of the royal diary was written very thoughtfully. But even despite all this, the girl herself did not understand why she was reborn as a local protagonist. Then she moved on to the second question, because she was interested in why she continued to remember her past life. She had several answers to this question. For example, this wine could have been string theory for the idea of reincarnation. Memories disappeared when you died, or she had super memory. But still, why she started this life, and 7 years later, it still remains a mystery to her. The last question was the most fascinating for her, because she wanted to know if this body had memories of the first years of life. Of course, she understood that she could not remember anything. The girl suggested that perhaps some memories were deliberately eradicated from the body. For example, knowledge of a language, or there was no access to memories before the moment the moon occupied the body of this character. But there was another topic that she would like to discuss with herself in order to understand everything in detail. She believed that Pluto was behaving rather strangely. Because she herself did not understand how this could be connected with her second, I decided to simply move on to another question. After all, they must find 4 sacred objects. These items were prepared by Queen Athena to stop the British invasion. When combined, they are capable of creating a powerful barrier. In the original story, only 2 items were found, and even they were stolen by a spy right from the royal palace. The tip was destroyed by the British, and Princess Luna was simply killed. And this meant that she had serious problems, because in her past life, she did not read the part in which they were looking for these holy objects, because she considered it boring and moved on to something interesting. They knew that Luna died due to the loss of mana. Unlike Athena, she had a unique type of magic, so she received it from her father. In the Empress's room, there was an object with which one could determine this type of mana. So this was the solution to all her problems. However, this should not have worked, because it was used to punish the killers posing as members of the royal family. Those who did not belong to them, using it, were supposed to die immediately on the spot. However, Luna had a good idea. She believed that they could tell the candidates that they were going to test them in this way to find out which of them was the father of the moon, and whoever survived was the real one. She had no choice. After all, if she deceived all 4 of them and forced them to take this test, then she could survive. Of course, she didn't want to resort to such extreme measures. All they needed to do was find the 4 sacred objects and prevent the British invasion. Then she could survive and wouldn't let anyone down. The moon had only a few ways to survive in such a case. Since she did not want to sacrifice anyone, she had to really find the 4 sacred objects or use another method and set everyone up to save herself. After the moon had resolved all these issues, she locked herself back into her head. And then she suddenly felt that she had an incredibly strong desire to sleep. She certainly hadn't rested since the egg hunt and the final dance. However, using restorative magic after a sleepless night at birthday banquets is a royal tradition. The healer had used healing magic on her this morning, so she shouldn't have wanted to sleep. But for some reason, her eyes just kept closing. Luna eventually decided to take a little rest. She thought that nothing terrible would happen since she had completed most of the test. Several hours passed. Eugene came to her and wanted to check her test, but he saw that she had fallen asleep. Finally, he took a piece of paper and rechecked all the results, after which he was incredibly amazed. And all because the Chancellor gave the girl a test for high-level magicians. She solved it completely in some time, and after that, she fell asleep. Of course, everyone was amazed by these events. The maids began to gossip about all this, and when Eddie heard, he immediately demanded details because it interested him. Cupid himself was amazed. Of course, he knew that the moon was smart. However, he did not imagine that the girl could possess such high knowledge. Meanwhile, Andy had already approached the office where Luna continued to sleep. He wanted to gather her in order to continue celebrating her birthday and also a good score on the test. However, she had no right to leave this room until she said that she had finished the test or until the time ran out, and Eugene could not cancel this rule because he ran off on his own business, admiring her results. When the man entered her room, he threw the girl's jacket over her back, and he decided for himself that no matter who her biological father was, without a doubt, she was like his own daughter to him. If he had killed the queen in the brothel earlier following the contract, he would never have met this wonderful girl, so he was happy that he disobeyed. But despite all this, he will never forget the moment when the queen stained her hands with blood for him, so he was ready to serve her daughter for eternity. It even seemed to him that everything that had ever happened before had led to this very moment. He sat down opposite her and simply admired this peaceful picture of a sleeping girl. At that moment, what he wanted most was for time to simply stand still and for him to sit like that for eternity. He came to the palace to meet the princess, because like any servant for the good of the empire, he should be happy that the girl is so gifted when he heard the latest news. But the man doubted that such an ordinary knight as he had any right to congratulate her on this. When he learned that he was now one of 4 candidates for the princess's father and had to earn her trust, he considered it all an absurd game. He didn't understand how it was possible to choose not just an emperor, but also someone's father in a similar way. This whole idea was a reason for failure, even at the moment when Andy became a candidate. So he didn't understand what to do now, and why it was so unpleasant for him to see the princess dancing with Hercules. After some time, the man realized that at least he was able to protect the princess from dancing with the vulgar Andy, but in the end, the man did not understand himself. When he climbed to the right floor, he saw Andy carrying Luna in his arms. Of course, he immediately grimaced because he did not expect to see such a picture. The man turned to him and asked who allowed a mere rat to touch such a princess as the moon. Well, the man laughed just because of this. He started arguing with Pluto, and, as always, it was very unpleasant. Hercules, meanwhile, also came to the palace and heard how the maids doubted that the moon had done this test on her own and had not peeped anywhere. When the guy heard these conversations, he immediately protested. He was sure that the princess was a genius because he saw her skills with his own eyes. When he admitted that he was not the one who found the hidden egg, it was Luna who found it in the monster's nest, thanks to her ingenuity. So she had insight not like a child, but like a real adult. The maids immediately changed their minds. They agreed. Hercules was already heading towards her office, but then suddenly a myth climbed in through the window. He said that Luna is truly a special child. She tamed the chicks with such ease as if anyone could do it. He also strongly recommended that the maids watch their words in the future. Otherwise, they might end up without their heads. Meanwhile, on the 4th floor, the guys continued to quarrel among themselves. Luna, who woke up but pretended to be asleep, realized that everything was getting out of control, so she needed to somehow intervene. None of them were supposed to die, but they were ready to tear each other's throats out. The girl knew that even if all the candidates joined forces, they still wouldn't be enough to stop Britain. So she decided to take a risk and pretend that she was talking to her dad in a dream. The girl muttered something and after that continued to pretend as if she was sleeping. And the men, hearing this, were ready to burst into tears because each one thought that it was addressed to him. The moon was amazed that even Pluto was able to stop because of what she said. He hid his sword and decided that arguing with him was useless anymore. Then Cupid came running upstairs. He said that the test was not the main problem. He thought it was strange that the man decided to visit Princess Luna. After all, he had an assassination order. He said that the Chancellor had finally stopped bragging about the princess and had come to his senses. Because of this, he had begun to worry too much about her. Andy was shocked that he was being asked to leave the girl and go kill someone, but Cupid explained that he couldn't handle it on his own. And the guy was falling in love with the commander of the assassination squad, so that's the only way. He immediately asked about his goal and quickly headed for the exit, handing the girl over to Amor. Luna then watched as one of the candidates for her father left, and because of his cute and stupid appearance, it completely slipped her mind that he was the leader of the Dark Knights who specialized in assassinations. And if the Knights of the Blue Hawk of Pluto worked in the light of day for the imperial family, then the Dark Knights of Andy worked in the shadows and at night. More accurately, they could be called knights, but they do not use only swords to kill their targets, so it is obvious that Athena did not call this particular man to her bedroom for nothing. She understood that he would be of great use. Cupid was about to take the girl to the room. However, he asked him to hand her over to him. The man did not object. He only asked him to try not to wake her. When the girl ended up in Pluto's arms, he was like powder, because he always forgets that she is heavier than she looks. Or maybe he immediately laughed because of this. As he should have, the man carried the girl to her bedroom and laid her on the bed. Luna continued to pretend as if she was sleeping. She hoped that he would leave sooner, but the guy decided to admire her while she was sleeping and sat down next to her and also thought that she looked just like a queen. Luna at that moment realized that Pluto had been acting like a demon on the battlefield lately. Even though, according to the plot, they weren't even that close. Luna had simply been avoiding this man all the time because she was afraid of him, and he, in turn, was simply fulfilling his nightly duties. However, now he was different. The girl did not understand what this was connected with. He sat next to me for a while longer and then realized that he had to leave. The man stood up, but suddenly I felt a small hand grab his index finger, and the moon wheezed something. She called him Dad and thought to herself that she had simply gone crazy. Rasu had done something similar, but her actions were not without reason. She wanted to check whether he could really become a loving father. Says if so, then it could have said perfectly well, she is the survival of the girl, she grimaced, thinking that he was probably the same tyrant, and it just seemed to her that he was going to shake off her hand and just leave. But the man changed his mind. He sat down next to her and continued to hold his hand so that she could hold his finger. And then a small smile flashed across his face. Meanwhile, the Myth and Hercules were about to go up to the princess. However, the dragon saw that the other had some things in his hands and immediately asked what they were. The guy explained that he wanted to congratulate the princess. However, he did not have time to prepare anything nice, so he collected a bouquet of wildflowers. Hercules thought it would be beautiful when he assembled it. However, now that he looks at it again, he realizes that it is too wretched. The Myth calmed him down and explained that little things make children happy, and they cherish even the smallest things. He used magic to wrap these few flowers with a ribbon to make it look even more beautiful. She also explained to Hercules that what he had in his hands was very valuable simply because it was small and fragile and prepared especially for Luna, so he should not devalue his efforts.